The avoidant had a very specific script in mind when they pulled away. They expected you to chase, to ask what was wrong, to try harder to fix things, to essentially beg for their attention and reassurance. This is how it always worked before. Their withdrawal triggered your pursuit. Their distance made you reach out more. Their coldness made you try harder to warm them up. But this time, you did something completely unexpected. You went silent. You didn't chase. You didn't ask questions. You didn't try to fix anything. You just let them go and moved on with your life. This silence from you has completely disrupted the avoidant's expectations and created a reaction they didn't anticipate. They thought they were in control of the dynamic, that they could withdraw and you'd come running. But your silence proves they never had the control they thought they did, and now they're dealing with consequences they never expected. Here's what happens when you go silent on an avoidant who expected you to beg, and why this response is more powerful than anything you could have said. Your silence broke their pattern, and they don't know how to respond. The avoidant is used to a specific dance. They withdraw, you pursue. They create distance, you close it. They pull away, you pull them back. This pattern has worked for them their entire life. It allows them to maintain control, manage distance, and keep people attached without having to be vulnerable or consistent. But your silence broke this pattern completely. When they withdrew expecting you to chase, you didn't. When they created distance expecting you to panic, you remained calm. When they pulled away expecting you to beg them to stay, you let them go. This pattern disruption has left the avoidant completely disoriented because their usual strategy isn't working. The broken pattern means the avoidant can't predict what happens next. They're used to being able to control the flow of the relationship through their withdrawal. They knew that pulling away would make you pursue, which would allow them to either let you back in when they felt like it or push you further away if they needed more space. But your silence removes their ability to control through withdrawal. They don't know if you're coming back. They don't know if you're waiting. They don't know what your silence means or how long it will last. This uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable for someone who relies on being able to predict and control relational dynamics. Your silence also forces the avoidant to actually make a choice rather than keeping all options open. When you were pursuing, they could just manage your pursuit without committing to anything. They could keep you at whatever distance felt comfortable while knowing you'd still be there. But your silence requires them to either reach out and do the work of reconnection, which means being vulnerable and risking rejection, or accept that you're gone and deal with that loss. Having to make an actual choice rather than just managing distance is uncomfortable and unfamiliar territory for the avoidant. They're experiencing the anxiety they usually create in you. The avoidant is now feeling the exact anxiety they've been making you feel throughout the relationship. The wondering if you're thinking about them, the analyzing every past interaction for signs of how you feel, the checking to see if you've reached out, the anxiety about whether you're moving on. This is the anxiety you lived with constantly when they were hot and cold, when they withdrew unpredictably, when they kept you guessing. But they never had to feel it because you were always the one chasing, always the one anxious about the connection, always the one wondering where you stood. The role reversal of anxiety is deeply uncomfortable for the avoidant. They're used to being the calm one, the unbothered one, the one in control of their emotions while you're the anxious one. But your silence has flipped this dynamic. Now they're the ones feeling anxious about where they stand with you. They're the ones wondering what you're thinking. They're the ones feeling insecure about whether you still care. This experience of the anxiety they usually create is showing them exactly what they've been putting you through, though they may not have the self-awareness to recognize it. The anxiety also includes the avoidant realizing they don't have the tools to manage these feelings that you've been managing all along. You learned to self-soothe through their withdrawals, to manage uncertainty, to cope with their inconsistency. But the avoidant never had to develop those skills because they were always the one creating the anxiety, not experiencing it. Now that they're on the receiving end of uncertainty and silence, they don't know how to handle it. They're discovering that the anxiety they created in you was actually quite painful, and they don't like being on this side of it at all. Your silence proved you're not who they thought you were. The avoidant had you categorized in their mind as someone who needed them, someone who would chase, someone who couldn't walk away. This categorization made them feel safe and in control. They believed they could treat you however they wanted because you'd always come back. But your silence shattered that belief entirely. You're not the desperate person they thought you were. You're not the one who will beg and plead for their attention. You're actually someone with enough self-respect and strength to walk away when your needs aren't being met. And this revelation is threatening everything the avoidant believed about you and the dynamic. The shattered perception also means the avoidant is seeing you with new eyes. They're recognizing qualities they didn't know you had or didn't think you'd ever direct away from them. Your strength, your self-respect, your ability to let go, your capacity to prioritize yourself over the relationship. These qualities make you more attractive, but also more intimidating. The avoidant is realizing they lost someone more powerful than they understood, and that loss feels different than losing someone they perceived as weak or dependent. Your unexpected strength also makes the avoidant question their judgment about the entire relationship. If they were wrong about you being someone who would chase forever, what else were they wrong about? Were you actually the problem, or were their patterns the problem? Was your attachment the issue, or was there avoidance? Were you too needy, or were they too defended? Your silence is forcing questions they've been avoiding, and the answers might require them to take responsibility in ways they've never had to before. They're realizing silence speaks louder than your words ever did. Throughout the relationship, the avoidant could dismiss your words. When you expressed hurt, they could rationalize it away. When you stated your needs, they could minimize them. When you tried to communicate, they could tune you out or argue. But they can't dismiss your silence. Silence is a form of communication they can't defend against, rationalize away, or minimize. Your silence says everything your words couldn't, that you're done accepting poor treatment, that your patience has limits, that you value yourself enough to walk away. This message is landing in ways your verbal communication never could. The power of silence also includes the space it creates for the avoidant to hear their own thoughts without the buffer of managing your reactions. When you were talking, asking questions, expressing feelings, they could focus on responding to you rather than examining themselves. But your silence removes that distraction. Now they're alone with their thoughts about the relationship, their patterns, their choices. This forced introspection is uncomfortable but potentially transformative if they're capable of actually looking at themselves honestly. Your silence also demonstrates a level of finality that words never conveyed. You could say you were done, that you were leaving, that you couldn't do this anymore, and they wouldn't fully believe you because words are easy to take back. But silence, especially sustained silence, feels more permanent. It shows you're not just threatening to leave or trying to get a reaction. You're actually gone. This finality is hitting them harder than any ultimatum or emotional conversation ever did because they can't argue with it or talk you out of it. They're discovering they actually cared more than they admitted. The avoidance reaction to your silence is revealing to them how much they actually cared about you, which is more than they ever admitted to themselves or to you. When you were there pursuing them, they could take you for granted and downplay their feelings. They could tell themselves they weren't that invested, that they could take or leave the relationship, that you mattered, but not that much. But your absence is proving those were lies they told themselves. They miss you more than they expected. They think about you more than they want to admit. They care about your silence in ways that reveal their feelings were deeper than they acknowledged. The discovered feelings also include the avoidant recognizing that their detachment was a performance, not reality. They performed not caring to protect themselves from vulnerability, but underneath the performance were real feelings they were suppressing. Your silence has removed the need for performance because you're not there to see it, and without the performance, they're confronting the actual feelings they were hiding. They love you or loved you. They valued you. They wanted you in their life. These truths are emerging now that you're gone, and the avoidant is dealing with feelings they spent the relationship avoiding. The late recognition of feelings also creates regret that's eating at them. They're realizing they had something valuable and they didn't appreciate it or treat it properly because they were too busy managing distance and protecting themselves. Now that it's gone, now that your silence confirms you're not coming back, they're confronting what they lost through their own patterns. This regret is specific and painful because it's not about bad luck or circumstances. It's about them failing to value what they had when they had access to it. Your silence is teaching them consequences they've never faced. Throughout their life, the avoidance patterns haven't had real consequences. People might get hurt, but they'd usually come back. The avoidant could withdraw, and people would wait. They could be inconsistent, and people would tolerate it. They could take people for granted, and those people would stay anyway. But your silence is a consequence they can't escape or minimize. You're not coming back to give them another chance. You're not waiting for them to be ready. You're not tolerating their patterns anymore. This is a real consequence, maybe the first real one they've faced, and it's forcing them to confront that their patterns have costs. The consequence of your silence also includes the avoidant recognizing that they can't always control outcomes through their usual strategies. They thought they could withdraw, and you'd wait. They thought they could take their time, and you'd be there when they were ready. They thought they could manage distance indefinitely without losing you. But your silence proves they were wrong about all of that. They don't have the control they thought they had. Their strategies didn't work. Their patterns cost them something they valued. This loss of control and recognition that their approach failed is a consequence that might actually motivate change if they're capable of it. The consequence also means the avoidant is experiencing loss that's entirely their fault. They can't blame you for leaving because you stayed longer than most people would have. They can't blame circumstances because the circumstances were their patterns. They can't blame incompatibility because you were compatible until they made it impossible. This level of responsibility for loss is new for many avoidants who usually find ways to externalize blame. But your silence, especially if you've been clear about why you're done, makes it impossible for them to avoid taking responsibility. They're torn between reaching out and protecting their ego. The avoidant is experiencing internal conflict between wanting to reach out to you and needing to protect their ego and defend itself. Part of them wants to break your silence, to reach out, to try to fix things, or at least understand what's happening. But another part of them can't tolerate the vulnerability that reaching out requires. If they reach out, they're admitting they care. They're risking rejection. They're showing you that your silence affected them. These vulnerabilities are deeply threatening to someone whose entire identity is built on not needing anyone. The conflict also includes the avoidance pride, preventing them from doing what they actually want to do. They want to contact you, but they don't want to look weak or needy by doing so. They want to know if you're thinking about them, but they don't want to ask and reveal they're thinking about you. They want to repair the relationship, but they don't want to be the one making effort or showing vulnerability. This pride is keeping them paralyzed even though they're suffering, and they're learning that protecting ego comes at the cost of connection. The internal conflict is also exhausting them in ways they're not used to. Usually, the avoidance patterns create distance that feels comfortable and sustainable, but your silence has created a situation where distance feels painful, but reaching out feels impossible. They're stuck in discomfort without their usual escape routes. They can't withdraw more because you're already gone. They can't manage distance because there's no contact to manage. They can't control the dynamic because they're not in it anymore. This trapped feeling between wanting to reach out and being unable to is torture for someone who relies on feeling in control. Your silence is more powerful than begging ever would have been. If you had begged as the avoidant expected, you would have reinforced all their beliefs and patterns. You would have confirmed they could treat you poorly and you'd still chase. You would have shown them their withdrawal works as a control mechanism. You would have taught them you don't have real boundaries, but your silence does the opposite. It shatters their beliefs, disrupts their patterns, shows them you absolutely have boundaries that you'll enforce. This lesson is powerful because it can't be undone. They now know that you're someone who will walk away, and that knowledge changes the power dynamic forever. The power of silence also includes that it's working on them in ways begging never could. Begging would have satisfied their ego but not created any motivation for change. Your silence wounds their ego but creates potential motivation for actual transformation. They're uncomfortable, they're anxious, they're dealing with consequences, they're questioning themselves. These are the conditions that sometimes lead to real change, though change is still not guaranteed. What is guaranteed is that your silence has affected them more deeply than your pursuit ever did. Your silence also preserved your dignity in ways begging would have destroyed. You didn't lower yourself, you didn't plead, you didn't make yourself small to try to keep someone who wasn't showing up properly. You simply recognized your worth and walked away when it wasn't being honored. This dignity is something you'll carry forward, and it makes you powerful not just to this avoidant, but to yourself. You've learned you can walk away from people who don't treat you right, and that's a power that will serve you in every future relationship. The avoidant may or may not learn from your silence, but you've learned something invaluable, that you're strong enough to choose yourself over someone who won't choose to show up for you properly. The silence also demonstrates that you understand actions speak louder than words. You could have sent long messages explaining why you were hurt. You could have tried to make them understand through extensive conversation. You could have given them one more chance to prove they could change. But you recognized that the pattern was the message. Their withdrawal told you everything you needed to know about their capacity and willingness to show up for you. Your silence in response tells them everything they need to know about your boundaries and self-respect. No words were necessary because the actions on both sides communicated clearly what words never could. The power of your silence ultimately lies in how it frees you from the cycle you were trapped in. As long as you were responding to their withdrawal with pursuit, you were perpetuating a dynamic that hurt you repeatedly. But your silence breaks that cycle permanently. You're no longer participating in a dance that requires you to lose dignity to keep someone's attention. You're no longer accepting breadcrumbs and pretending they're enough. You're no longer teaching someone through your actions that they can treat you poorly without consequence. Your silence is your declaration of independence from a pattern that was destroying your self-worth, and that freedom is the real power of choosing silence over begging. What your silence teaches them that words never could. Your silence is teaching the avoidant lessons that all your words failed to teach. It's showing them that withdrawal has consequences, that taking people for granted leads to loss, that patterns that push people away eventually succeed in pushing them away permanently. These are lessons the avoidant needed to learn, but couldn't learn while you were still chasing, still available, still willing to accept poor treatment in exchange for occasional connection. The lesson also includes the avoidant learning that they're not as in control as they believed. They thought they controlled the relationship through their withdrawal, through their ability to manage distance. But your silence shows them they only had control as long as you participated in the dynamic. Once you stopped participating, once you withdrew your presence entirely, their control disappeared. This lesson about the limits of their power might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary if they're ever going to develop healthier relationship patterns. Your silence is also teaching them what they lost by being unable to show up properly. When you were there pursuing, they could take you for granted while telling themselves they could always change or try harder later if they wanted to. But your silence removes that option. They're learning that later isn't guaranteed, that people's patience has limits, that opportunities to love and be loved don't stay open forever. Whether they learn these lessons in time to apply them to future relationships depends on their capacity for growth. But your silence has at least created the classroom where these lessons can be learned. Most importantly, your silence is teaching you lessons that matter more than anything it teaches them. You're learning that you can survive their absence, that you're strong enough to enforce boundaries even when it hurts, that your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to value you, that you deserve better than what they offered, and you're willing to be alone rather than accept less. These lessons about your own strength and worth are the most valuable outcome of your silence, regardless of how the avoidant responds or what they learn from it.